I'm going to to share some things. Some things that have meant a great deal to me in the course of the years, and I'm not sure at all that what I shall do tonight will be in accordance with the prescription that was given before I stood, because it is very difficult to make a decision to live publicly what is in some ways beyond any formula of expression in the presence of so many people. But I'd like to indulge myself tonight by doing the things that, reading some things and maybe commenting things that are significant to me, and things that for their own sake I will enjoy doing. And I want to say at the very beginning that the things that I read, whatever comments I make, they are read in a sense for the renewal of my own spirit, which needs renewing. Certainly, at the end of a week like this one. But we shall wander along. What you find that is interesting to listen to, you listen to, and then what you find that isn't interesting to listen to, you just live your own private life in the midst of the congregation. The first thing I want to read is something that marks for me one of the great watershed moments of experience. Sometimes it seems as if life is not merely alive and dynamic and energized, but that life is personal, even in its most impersonal aspects. That there's a moment when your specific need encounters the thing that makes the difference for the rest of your life. And it does not seem to be by plan or design. And of course, if a person be religious, it is the hand of God. But what would it be if if you happen to have missed it, that that had been the hand of God. This is all very curious to me. I remember many years ago going to California from Washington, where I lived, going out to Los Angeles to open the Los Angeles Sunday Evening Club. And it was during the Depression, and I went the long way across the fabulous state of Texas because there was not enough money to buy my ticket, and in those days I was too shy and embarrassed to write to the Los Angeles Sunday Evening Club and say, will you send me a check so that I can get there? I was proud. I wouldn't hesitate now, but I was more defensive then, you see. So I took the map and studied the various junction points along the way. You could travel by day coach for 1.5 cents a mile. And I had 10 days to make the journey from Washington to Los Angeles. And I had boys, students of mine who were living everywhere. And my first port of call was Cincinnati, where I had a couple of days getting dividends on meals that I had given them. And then the next stop was New Orleans, and from New Orleans to Houston. And then I decided that I would take the long stretch from Houston to El Paso. But Mrs. Thurman had asked me so many times to go, when I was in Texas, to go to San Antonio to see the Alamo. And she's the historian in the family, and I have a sense of history, but that's all. So the train stopped in the place where the Alamo is. I couldn't think of it, and it was there for a half hour, from 12 to 12:30. I got off the train and walked around a little, and I didn't like the way the place looked. And just, 25 minutes after 12, I decided that I would go on. So I got back on the train, and as I walked to my seat, I was literally turned around and made to take my bag down from the rack and take my top coat and move rapidly to the door, and I jumped off the train as it pulled slowly out of the station. And I stayed in San Antonio until midnight and got the next train, the midnight train. And when we arrived the next afternoon at Yuma, Arizona, just as we reached the so-called yard of the station, just a half a mile before this point, I noticed that the train stopped, and to the left here was this tremendous wreck. You may remember it. A brakeman went berserk and threw a switch when a very fast freight train was coming, and this freight train plowed into the passenger train. Some 35 or 40 people were killed. The coaches were on their side, and huge holes where acetylene torches had cut out sections of the steel to pull the dead bodies out. And this was the train that I got off of. And by the same curious bit of mystery and existence, there were some people I know who decided at the last minute to take the train. Now, so that we don't know much about. The only thing we know is that when at the critical moment of crucial need, if the word is spoken, that makes the difference. All the rest of your life is changed. And if the word is not spoken, the rest of your life is not changed. And I'm not sure that because the word was spoken to one and not spoken to the other, that this represents some special dispensation of the grace of God. I do not know. The only thing I know is that at a critical time in my own life, I ran across this. And it has been one of the great beacon lights on the horizon of all my days and all my nights. And this is the paragraph. I thought I had it. Well, here it is. The new mother, when she looks down at the little head upon her breast, whispers in her heart, "Oh, may you seek after truth. If anything I teach you be false, may you throw it from you and pass on to higher and deeper knowledge than I ever had. If you are an artist, may no love of wealth or fame or admiration and no fear of blame or misunderstanding make you ever paint with pen or brush an ideal or a picture of external life otherwise than as you see it. If you become a politician, may no success for your party or yourself or the seeming good of even your nation ever lead you to tamper with reality and play a diplomatic part. In all the difficulties which will arise in life, fling yourself down on the truth and cling to that as a drowning man in a stormy sea flings himself onto a plank and clings to it, knowing that whether he sink or swim with it, it is the best that he has. If you become a man of thought and learning, never with your left hand be afraid to pull down what your right hand has painfully built up through the years of thought and study. If you see it at last, not to be founded on that which is, die poor, unloved, unknown, a failure. But shut your eyes to nothing that seems to them the reality. Now this is there isn't a day of my life in 25 years that some aspect of this has not passed through my mind. Whether it has done any good or not. Now I want to read something else. This is from John Drinkwater's Abraham Lincoln, and this has been very significant to me because of what it has to say about the very difficult problem that the individual faces who believes that the doctrine of persuasion is valid. As over against the kind of logic and sometimes the efficiency of varying forms of violence. It's not a solution, but I reflect upon it many times when in my own living I'm forced to decide what kind of human being I want to be, and not let the circumstances of my life determine the kind of human being I should be. So these are the lines. Lincoln is speaking. I beg you not to harass yourself, Mom. I too believe war to be wrong. It's the weakness and the jealousy and folly of men that make a thing so wrong possible. But we are all weak and jealous and foolish. That's how the world is, and we cannot outstrip the world. Some of the worst of us are sullen, aggressive, still. Just clumsy, greedy pirates. Some of us have grown out of that. But the best of us have an instinct to resist aggression if it won't listen to persuasion. And you never know when the zero moment has come, when aggression will no longer listen to persuasion. You may say it's a wrong instinct. I don't know, but it's there, and millions of good men. I don't believe it's a wrong instinct. I believe that the world must come to wisdom slowly. It is for us who hate aggression to persuade men always against it and hope that little by little they will hear us. But in the meantime, there will come moments when the aggressors will force the instinct of resistance to act. Then we must act earnestly, praying always in our courage that never again will this thing happen. And then we must turn again and again to persuasion. This appeal to force is the misdeed of an imperfect world. But we are imperfect. We must strive to purify the world but we must not think ourselves pure above the world. Well, I don't know about that. I don't know. Now let me read something else. I read this in a sermon. I always like to read something before I talk or before I speak, whatever it is that I do. Primarily because it gives your audience a chance to have their minds focused, and you don't have to use any of the material of your ideas to get this to happen. The thing you read is in itself significant, so significant that it will stand for itself, and when the minds, when the noise of the silence workings of the minds has been stilled by something that is beautiful and significant, then it's up to you to hold the minds that are in focus. So I read this in a sermon. It's a foreword to a sermon, and because our service is a broadcast, someone heard it and knew who the poet was. I didn't know the poet. And I simply knew that I clipped it out of the New Yorker quite some time ago, but in wearing it around, I'd lost the name and so forth. And this person who heard it wrote the poet, who was a retired professor of philosophy at Amherst. And he wrote me a letter in which he sent the full poem and said he was very glad to know that there was enough vitality in Boston University for somebody to dare to read something like this. So he was very happy about it. But this is a part of the poem. Now we are ready to look at something pretty special. It's a duck riding the ocean 100 feet beyond the surf. No, it isn't a gull. A gull always has a raucous touch about him. This is some sort of duck, and he cuddles in the swells. He isn't cold, and he is thinking things over. There's a big heaving in the Atlantic, and he is a part of it. He looks a bit like a mandarin or the Lord Buddha meditating under the bo tree. But he has hardly enough above the eyes to be a philosopher. He has poise, however, which is what philosophers must have. He can rest while the Atlantic heaves because he rests in the Atlantic. Probably he doesn't know how large the ocean is, neither do you. But he realizes it. And what does he do, I ask you? He sits down in it. He reposes in the immediate as if it were infinity, which it is. That's religion. And the duck has it. He has made himself part of the boundless by easing himself into it just where the boundless touches him. The people of the Middle Ages were more like this duck than we are. They took life as it presented itself and ran it up in spires of Gothic. They crossed few oceans, but they floated on the sea of time. And a cat is more like this duck than we are. We can radio to the moon and get back a pip for an answer. But a cat can make a hearthrug, a haven in the infinite, or launch 4 kittens into life in a cracker box by the furnace, purring with pride because she has tuned in on cosmic waves. I like the little duck. He doesn't know much, but he has religion. Eight-year-old Johnny was very serious, and I called him into my office at the hospital and explained how he could save the life of his little sister. Mary, age 6, was near death, a victim of disease from which Johnny had made a miraculous recovery only 2 years earlier. Now, Mary's only chance was a blood transfusion from someone who had previously conquered the illness. Since the 2 children had the same rare blood type, Johnny would be the ideal donor. Johnny, I asked, would you like to give your blood to Mary? He hesitated a moment, his lower lip trembling, but I had seen many people older than Johnny who were a little frightened by the idea of giving blood, so I thought no more about it. Then he smiled and said, "Sure, Dr. Morris, I'll give my blood for my sister." The operating room was prepared and the children wheeled in. Mary, pale and thin, Johnny, robust and almost cherubic. Neither spoke, but when their eyes met, Johnny grinned broadly. As Johnny's blood siphoned into Mary's veins, her pale skin began to turn pink. There was complete silence as the operation proceeded. But then Johnny spoke in a brave little voice I will never forget. "Say, Dr. Morris," he said, "when do I die?" It was only then that I realized what that moment's hesitation, that almost imperceptible trembling of the lip had meant when I had talked to Johnny in my office. He thought that giving up his blood for his sister meant giving up his life. In that brief moment, he had made his great decision. Now, some of you may remember this. I read this for very private reasons. A sparrow who lived in the eaves of a church and whose ideas were somewhat erratic met a pigeon one day from a church all the way whose opinions were very dogmatic. They stopped in their search for a midday repast, and in hunting they both were astute. And I hate to relate, they engaged in debate that led to a frightful dispute. Quoth the pigeon, "I hold theological views considered both learned and wise. So without more delay, I will show you today the only straight road to the skies." Said the sparrow, "Your effort would be unrepaid, for I follow a different road, and it causes me grief to hear your belief in such a ridiculous code." Then without more ado, I'm sorry to say, they engaged in a battle most gory, till each was bereft of his sense and breath, and the curtain here falls on their story. Now, a strange little bird from a blossoming tree had witnessed the scene with surprise. Then, with unfettered wing and a heart that could sing, he took the straight road to the sky. And now this from Felix Salton's Bambi, that you may remember, but this is one of the things that I read aloud to myself several times during the year, not because I'm morbid, but because I read it. The leaves were falling from the great oak at the meadow's edge. They were falling from all the trees. One branch of the oak reached high above the others and stretched far out over the meadow. Two leaves clung to its very tip. It isn't the way it used to be, said one leaf to the other. No, the other leaf answered, so many of us have fallen off tonight, we are almost the only ones left on our branch. You never know who's going to go next, said the first leaf. Even when it was warm and the sun shone, a storm or a cloudburst would come sometimes, and many leaves were torn off, though they were still young. You never know who's going to go next. The sun seldom shines now, sighed the second leaf, and when it does, it gives no warmth. We must have warmth again. Can it be true, said the first leaf? Can it really be true that others come to take our places when we are gone, and after them still others and more and more? It is really true, whispered the second leaf. We can't even begin to imagine it. It's beyond our powers. It makes me... But it has to do with tenderness. It's a great gift to be tender without being soft. To be gracious without being ingratiating. Well, yes. In a pottery factory here in Cincinnati, there is a workman who had one small invalid child at home. He wrought at his trade with exemplary fidelity, being always in the shop with the opening of the day. He managed, however, to bear each evening to the bedside of his wee lad, as he called him, a flower, a bit of ribbon, or a fragment of crimson glass. Indeed, anything that would lie out on the white counterpane and give color to the room. He was a quiet, unsentimental man, but never went home at night without something that would make the little face light up with joy at his return. He never said to a living soul that he loved that boy so much. Still, he went on patiently loving him, And by, he moved that whole shop into positively real but unconscious fellowship with him. The workmen made curious little jars and cups upon their wheels and painted diminutive pictures down their sides before they stuck them in the corners to be burned at burning time in the kiln. One brought some fruit in the bulge of his apron, and another engravings in a rude scrapbook. Not one of them whispered a word, for this solemn thing was not to be talked about. They put them in the old man's hat where he found them. He understood all about it, and believe it or not, cynics as you will, but it is a fact that the entire pottery full of men of rather coarse fiber by temperament grew quiet as the months drifted, becoming gentle and kind, and some dropped swearing as the weary look on the patient fellow worker's face told them beyond mistake that the inevitable shadow was drawing nearer. Every day now, someone did a piece of work for him and put it on the sanded plank to dry so that he could come later and go home earlier. So when the bell tolled and the little coffin came out of the lonely door, right around the corner, out of sight, there stood 100 stalwart working men from the pottery with their clean clothes on, most of whom gave a half-day's time for the privilege of taking part in the simple procession and following to the grave that small burden of a child which probably not one of them had ever seen. Now, I referred to this book to some of you. It is called The Witnesses by Cleve Sansom, and it's a book of poetry written by this English one, 3/4 of which are on aspects of the life of the master. And of all the things that I have seen and read in my journey, these have some quality that is unique. I want to read one or two from it. They may not be, well, I'll read them. The first is The Rich Young Ruler. We like to read about the rich young ruler because we know that it doesn't apply to us. But that isn't so. What must I do, Master, to gain eternal life? From my youth I have kept the commandments, honored my parents, theft, murder, lying, adultery. All these, by God's mercy, have passed me by. What then must I do? Master, what more must I do? Sell all, he replied, and follow me. and easy saying. He, a carpenter's son, sacrificed nothing. And his man Peter, smirking, self-righteous, what did he lose but some worn nets, a boat share, and trade in the market? It wasn't myself I was thinking of, ease and possessions, but the responsibility of wealth towards its dependents. What of them, if I had obeyed him? What of my servants? What would become of them? That's what I tell myself now. But do I believe it? Then silent I walked away, watching my sandals. Oh, he was a gifted man. Then silent I walked away, watching my sandals, while his voice, the voice of my heart, followed me homeward. In misery I stopped by the lake, hid by the crowd wall. I heard him speak of the kingdom of God, the camel, the needle. Then long, just too much energy. Where is it? What I want to read here. This is the Phoenician woman, and I'm always impressed by the story of the Phoenician woman. The story of the, well, in some of the translations, the Syro-Phoenician woman. The woman of another race that Jesus encountered. And what I'm going to say now, I don't want to do any violence to anybody. But it's a great, this story of the Syrophoenician woman, as found in the Gospels, made it possible, I think, for me to discriminate between Jesus of the doctrine and Jesus of some of the dogma. It's been a hard road to hold for me. I've had very great difficulty in all my life. And trying to find a satisfying basis for what a satisfying basis in the faith, in the Christian faith, for what my own deepest bottom insight says to me that religion must mean the human being. That it has to be